Hello. This video is directed to Australia's One Nation Party leader Pauline Hanson and to Andrew Bolt, Chris Kenny, PETA CREDLIN, and Paul Murray of SkyNews Australia. I'm making this video in response to comments made last week by One Nation Party leader Pauline Hanson with regard to what I and thousands of other fathers know through experience to be the use of weaponized false allegations against primarily fathers by unscrupulous women to secure total control over our children. In particular, I'm challenging the barrage of attacks against Senator Hanson's comments from the same old group of radical feminists who have sought to undermine families and our children's lives for decades. Kudos to you, Senator Hanson, for your bravery, as well as to Sky News for daring to bring these matters into the public arena in Australia. It's 10 years overdue. However, in my opinion and experience, Senator Hanson's words are not nearly strong enough. So I'm going to up the ante and state for the record that the number of intentional false allegations of domestic violence and sexual assault, including those made outside of family court disputes, are closer to, if not beyond, 80%. I spent 7 years investigating numerous such cases inside a West Australia prison, where the clear, blatant facts proving false allegations, as well as the dirty, corrupt tactics used by police, prosecutors, judges, and certain defense lawyers to ensure convictions, are kept buried from the public, behind bars along with the wrongly convicted. I know, because I was one of them. My name is John Victor Ramses. I'm a United States citizen who resided in Perth, Western Australia for 18 years, between 2 September 1999 and 31 December 2017. The last 7 of those 18 years were spent in an Australian prison due to a still provable false allegation following a divorce from my Australian wife in 2010. But since that day, my case and my very name have been deliberately suppressed by the Australian government to prevent the American public from ever learning about the abhorrent, sinister, unlawful treatment that I, as a United States citizen, man and father, suffered at the hands of the police and judicial body of Western Australia. And God knows I've begged for that publicity for over 9 years now, including once risking my life during a dangerous stunt on 28 March 2012 to paint a desperate plea for help from the roof of Acacia Prison's J Block. I don't exaggerate when I say that mine is a story worthy of a feature film, one that occurs at the advent of this modern age of accusations. The corruption, the people and agendas behind it, the good men that fell without a prayer of fair treatment, the careers, families, and children destroyed by it, and the determination of one American father to fight against all odds, fear, and prison punishments, to have my little daughter back in my life again. Yet even in the midst of all my personal suffering and heartache and deteriorating health, I still helped numerous wrongly convicted prisoners with their legal matters and appeals, including the likes of Dennis John McKenna, Clinton Freudenstein, Alfred Aravelli, Dan Murphy, Mr. Stuart William Dugan, as well as Aboriginal prisoners and many others. They simply referred to me as the Yankee in cell number 9. But I was punished by the prison for helping these men. Through those 7 years, I read not only proof of their innocence, but also noted the exact same dirty tactics being used over and over, often by the same police, prosecutor, and judge in West Australia to bring a conviction. Convictions they could not have known were unjust. I kept regular journals through those years of the men I knew, the cases I worked on, with pages of my heartbreak and hopes, yearnings and anger, and the terrible things the prison did to me and to other prisoners. I painted portraits of some of those men and have cards and letters from their families thanking me for helping their son or brother or father when no one else would. My many letters to the U.S. Consulate, Ambassador, Julie Bishop, and to many others through those years recount it all, as well as my endless pleas for help, which were always ignored. I found myself deep in the bowels of that corruption during those years in prison, and more than once had my life threatened by prison intel if I didn't shut up and back off from helping prisoners, or trying to get media attention on my own case. as my records with both the U.S. State Department and West Australia Correctional Services, as well as any number of inmates and even prison officers will attest. I was no ordinary prisoner. But my story and my case have been purposely buried from publicity to hide the barbaric proceedings and trial that I was subjected to, as well as to shelter those who were responsible. Australia's privatized prisons are filled to capacity with unlawfully convicted innocent men, often put there on the false allegation of an unscrupulous woman, because she could. But while such a woman may have initiated the judicial process by reporting the false allegation for whatever motive, it is the police and prosecutor and judges who, through willful corruption, ensure that the helpless innocent man is convicted and stays convicted. I'd like very much for you, Sky News, to know who I am, what I suffered and endured in Western Australia. So I would encourage you to listen to my other video where I read a letter I had written to then Foreign Minister Julie Bishop on my birthday, 15 February 2015, shortly after the release of journalist Peter Greste from an Egyptian prison. That letter, which still causes heartbreak and strong emotions in me to read today, details the atrocities committed against me just to keep me, a father, from spending time with my daughter. A letter that Bishop received but ignored, as did every other politician and organization I had pleaded to for help and awareness. There is a link below to that video, as well as to an equally disturbing video where I read actual excerpts from my own trial transcript. A barbaric, cruel trial involving me, a U.S. citizen and father, that the Australian government has not wanted Americans to ever know about. Indeed, even my family in America had been warned off from going to the media in 2012 by my own U.S. consulate, who told them, "You don't know Western Australia. If you go to the media, they will only make it harder on John." Imagine a comment like that coming from a U.S. consulate. Imagine the loss of hope that flooded through me. So for the next 6 years, I remained locked up 10,000 miles from home and family, and of course, my precious daughter. But I didn't just sit still with my head bowed in defeat. On the contrary, I became determined to learn everything I could about how I got there through such sinister, unlawful methods, and what I learned frightened me, and it should frighten everyone. To understand how the false allegation industry works in ensuring convictions and why I assert that at least 80% of accused men are innocent, allow me to bullet point just a few facts exposing the corruption, the bias, the prejudice secretly used against an accused person in every case of alleged sexual assault or domestic violence. Firstly, any man merely accused is immediately arrested and charged on the accusation alone and treated as if they are already convicted. The same certainly would have happened to our Justice Kavanaugh if he had been in Australia when accused. Due process is rare in Australia, and now it is being attacked in the United States. Next, legal aid for legal counsel is almost always denied on accusations of a sex offense, unless the accused pleads guilty. Then a lawyer will be granted only for mitigating a sentence that has already been predetermined before any argument is ever heard. Think Arthur Miller's The Crucible. This leaves most men vulnerable without proper counsel, an easy kill for the prosecution. The next point is very, very important. Police investigating sexual assault or domestic violence allegations belong to certain special departments with different rules than other departments. Officers recruited into the sex crimes unit are assigned to the complainant like social workers and will not investigate any evidence in favor of the accused, save only to learn what evidence the accused may have in order to thwart his defense. When I had condemned my arresting officer, Gary Thwaites, for deliberately withholding evidence in my case that proved my innocence and asked him why he did it, he smirked and said, "Because, Mr. Ramses, I'm assigned to the complainant and helping you would be a conflict of interest." A conflict of interest. In other words, there was never any need for a trial in my case, much less a trial I was forced to suffer through completely alone, without counsel. I will never forget that cop's arrogant smirk. The proof that my wife had lied in the midst of a divorce and custody battle had been clear and evident, and still is. That evidence should have been put before a judge with a motion to dismiss the case. Instead, they deliberately withheld it and put me to trial. And Judge Braddock knew that evidence existed and that I wanted it and needed it for trial. In every single case of alleged sexual assault or domestic violence in Australia, it is the policy of the police to act only for the complainant and never for the accused. Try to find a case where the police fairly investigated the evidence of the accused as equally as the complainant. It will be a rare case indeed. So now you might begin to see why I assert the figure of 80% of allegations against men are false. The accuser is assured a conviction through bias, police, and judicial misconduct. During my time in Acacia, 2 different lawyers had also told me that over 80% of all convictions in these cases are brought on unsubstantiated, uncorroborated, mere accusations where the jury simply plays the better safe than sorry card, sometimes under pressure or intimidation, which means that over 80% of convicted men may well have been innocent, had the case been properly and unbiasedly investigated from the very beginning, as we in the public would expect. But there is no money in innocence, not for lawyers, not for private prisons, nor the judicial system. Another sinister tactic used by West Australian police in these cases is to listen to your alibi, look at your evidence, then take that information back to the complainant and the prosecutor and write out a brand new statement of facts that suddenly provides a miracle workaround, rendering your only evidence null or inadmissible. Dates are changed, details added or subtracted, as suits the prosecution. These witness statements can go through several different unique changes until the prosecutor is comfortable that all the evidence of your innocence is gone before trial, guaranteeing a conviction for the state. This occurs not just in sex offense or domestic violence cases, but also in other criminal cases as well as in family court cases. The Lloyd Rainey case of Western Australia is a good example of that despicable practice. Now, there has been a lot of concern in America lately about the making of historic accusations of sexual assault, some going back 30-plus years, as in the Kavanaugh case and others. What Americans need to understand is that both the making and prosecuting of historic allegations were put into practice in Western Australia 1 decade before they ever became popular among accusers in the U.S. The introduction of the so-called redress scheme around 2009 encouraged people to make allegations of sexual abuse going back to 1960, literally half a century. Are you kidding me? What's next? Will it soon be permissible to allow people to make accusations against someone they claim abused them in a past life? It's disgusting and it's out of control. Moreover, these alleged victims were offered money in the amount of $45,000 and up, and they were paid. Not one shred of evidence required, just the accusation. It's absolutely ludicrous, to say the least. Any rational person would know that an offer like that is bound to bring out the most unscrupulous, desperate people in society looking for easy money. Now, 10 years later, the same organizations of radical feminists are trying to normalize historic allegations here in the United States of America in order to completely override due process and our Constitution. Can you imagine the carnage to man after man, family after family, should the United States ever offer free money for an accusation with no proof required? While I was at Acacia Prison, the commission handling these redress claims came to the prison with flyers and posters that encouraged prisoners to submit their claims of historic abuse, enticing them with offers of money, and absolutely no proof required. I was stunned when I read the forms, and many of those prisoners received $5,000 or more from the commission through victims' compensation. I knew about 20 of those prisoners who laughed their butts off because they had lied about the abuse, but were paid at the taxpayer expense. I think I still have some of those old forms and flyers. The West Australian public was scammed and the taxpayer paid the bill. Money for an accusation. Another disturbing thing that I noticed while perusing prisoners' cases was that sentences given to convicted fathers on sexual allegations are typically based on the number of years that the youngest of his child will grow to be a legal age. I have seen this again and again. The sentences are not commensurate with the crime, but rather simply administered to isolate the father from his child until they are adults, erasing his influence from their tender childhood years. As an example, a man who is alleged to have raped his child multiple times would be given a sentence of, say, 5 years, because when you look at the age of his youngest child, he or she will be 18 in approximately 5 years. Yet a man who is convicted on, say, indecent exposure would get 14 years. Why? Because that is the length of time required for his youngest child to turn 18. So clearly, the imprisonment of fathers in cases of sexual assault or domestic violence allegations has absolutely nothing to do with punishing a criminal. The courts know they're innocent. It's solely about isolating the father from his children, destroying both of their lives in the process. I could go on and on exposing areas of judicial and police corruption in these cases as I discovered and experienced, such as the fact that trial transcripts are edited to omit any procedural errors that would otherwise be grounds for a miscarriage of justice in an appeal. It happened to me, and it happened in several other cases I investigated. Additionally, women who make an allegation, whether legitimate or false, will be encouraged by the police to make up additional incidents to give the case more shock and awe for the jury to digest. But if the woman accuser refuses, she is threatened with having her children removed to a foster care and demonized for protecting a pedophile. If the accuser should have a change of heart after cooling down and regret making a false allegation and wants to recant it, the same threat by the police still applies. Tom Percy once wrote in one of his articles some years back to the effect that the majority of wrongful convictions start with police. He's not wrong. I would challenge Sky News to invite women to anonymously tell their experiences with police in these cases. How many statements were they asked to rewrite? Did they actually write them themselves at all? Or was the statement written for them by police where they were just asked to sign it? How many have been threatened into exaggerating a claim of abuse? And without giving their identity, how many now regret having made a false allegation that destroyed a person's life and family? I think the results would not only shock the nation, it would demand an open inquiry into the corruption used in these cases. Police and judicial corruption must be stopped, and it will only be stopped through exposure. If you are truly concerned about false allegations, I've given you a lot to investigate. We're tired of losing our sons, our fathers, our brothers, and having our good families gutted by their kind. I lost my precious 10-year-old daughter, and she lost her father due to insidious laws that were deliberately designed to allow unscrupulous women to do such evil things in the throes of predictable emotional fits. But I'm also aware that some men make false allegations, both against other men and against innocent women. They're scum, but it's their accusations that come in at around 4 to 12% false, not women. The allegations against me were reported to police by my ex-wife on 1 July 2010, in collusion with her family and eldest daughter to prevent me from having access to my then 10-year-old daughter, a U.S. citizen born abroad, whom I have never seen or heard from again, despite having searched for her through this past decade. My estranged wife naively believed that I would only be deported, which is what she wanted, and which is what she told my stepdaughter would only happen in order to get her to participate as complainant, and I have the relative proof of that. Moreover, I know that it had been planned several months in advance to make allegations if I simply did not leave and forget Australia and my little daughter after the divorce. I also have cause to believe that my daughter's birth name was unlawfully changed by her mother with the assistance of the West Australian government shortly following my sudden arrest on 2nd July of that year, without my knowledge or express permission, so that I could not find her. Moreover, there is evidence to strongly suggest that certain wealthy, well-connected members of my wife's family used their influence to ensure that I would be convicted and imprisoned for the length of time until my daughter turned a legal age, where I was then unceremoniously deported from Australia back to the United States on New Year's Eve 2017. In other words, they did this terrible, cruel thing to me and my family simply to contain me in isolation for the sole purpose of preventing me from pursuing family court and rightful fair access to my daughter. Why? Because I was an American father, a foreign national. If they had released me back into the Australian community, as they should have, knowing as they did that I was innocent, I naturally would have pursued access to my daughter via family court, which would have included time in America with her American family, and they were not going to allow that to happen. So my life became expendable. Mine is a clear case of extreme prejudice against an American father in favor of a local Australian mother. Believe me, they knew I was innocent. The arresting officer, Gary Thwaites, and the prosecutor, Mark Nickel, both saw the evidence of my innocence. I directed them to it. But then they deliberately withheld it from me to ensure the jury never saw it. There is also certain evidence in my possession that may implicate the Attorney General of that time as having been complicit to some degree in that scheme to wrongly convict me, as a favor to said wealthy family member, as well as to ensure that no lawyer would take my case and that legal aid for counsel would be arbitrarily denied, at last forcing me to stand trial utterly alone and helpless in a foreign country with no counsel, no legal knowledge or support of any kind for 5 terrible, grueling days, naturally leading to a conviction they had predestined for me. If Americans had known what they were doing to me, how I suffered and pleaded during trial until finally collapsing into an emotional breakdown while being convicted under the abusive circumstance, there would have been an investigation. Hence, the reason why they buried my case and name from all publicity for all this time. Australia may well be the most dangerous nation in the world to be a man and father, and has been since 2010 for reasons I won't get into here. But a man would be risking his life to a random false allegation for just visiting Australia in these terrible times, where it is far more likely to lose your life to an allegation than ever being shot in the United States. Ask Bettina Arndt, Sydney Watson, or Daisy Cousins, very sharp and gutsy Australian women who have done the research and who have been on Sky News programs in the past. So, through the use of a conveniently timed and executed allegation, I never had a fair opportunity to seek access time with my daughter through the proper channel of family court, which I had prepared to initiate on Monday, 5 July 2010, as my wife had been aware of. Instead, I was promptly and conveniently arrested off the street ahead of that date on 2nd July 2010, charged and jailed in Hakea Maximum Prison. No investigation, no questions, no further ado, just goodbye, while simultaneously breaking the hearts of my good family and parents at home in America, who could do nothing for me. They had been warned not to. In effect, my wife ended my life and very existence simply because she could, because of devious, unscrupulous laws conceived and passed by equally unscrupulous legislators that allowed her to do it. The frivolous use of domestic violence or sexual assault allegations in the midst of a divorce or custody challenge wholly negates the very purpose of family court and removes it from the picture altogether. Instead, a mere allegation of some form of abuse or another becomes the immediate jurisdiction of the overzealous police and criminal justice system, ensuring that the father never sees the inside of a family court or his children ever again. How convenient for the accuser. A father trying to do the right thing through the right channel is suddenly and mercilessly wiped from existence, while the accuser is pampered and protected by the system, without any investigation or even a single question into her credibility or motive. So that begs the question, How can there be a fair inquiry into family court practices when a mere unsubstantiated allegation of abuse automatically removes the father from the family court arena and forces him straight into the criminal court? He never has the chance to put the tactics of the family court to the test. In my opinion, family court should not be simply investigated. It should be wholly abolished. It has, at any rate, long been by design a wicked, deliberate tool against fathers, grandparents, families, and most especially children, with money-hungry lawyers often the driving force behind it, creating conflict where otherwise it may not have existed to any worthy degree. What must be investigated, however, and thoroughly exposed is the criminal justice system's deceitful handling of cases of mere accusations, which methods I learned firsthand, and throughout my long years of Acacia Prison while investigating case after case of other prisoners who came to me for help. I brought some of those cases home with me, as well as my journals, news articles, and prisoner statements, including both a handwritten and typed affidavit by Dennis John McKenna, signed and notarized by a J.P. I was the man who prepared his legal documents and his pleas while in prison with him, not Patty Chung. She did F all. And I can assure the citizens of West Australia, you were blatantly lied to by Gary Adshead of the West Australian and the court that sentenced McKenna. Not that I'm saying McKenna is completely innocent, not in the least. McKenna was a scapegoat used to jumpstart the redress scheme under the Barnett government, with Gary Adshead as their chief propagandist. The entire redress scheme was based on a lie and deliberately, well-planned, media-generated hysteria to suit an agenda. It would make a hell of a documentary if anyone had the guts to investigate it and produce it. But what the Australian police and prosecutor and judicial branch did to me, a United States citizen and damn good father, and as a result to my precious Australian daughter, my family, and wonderful but aging parents here in the United States, is despicable and most certainly unforgivable. And we are still suffering as a direct result a decade later. We did nothing to Australia to ever deserve such horrible abuse. My parents loved visiting Australia in better times, and I am quite confident in saying that few Americans ever come to love Australia as I did. But so far, my story and case have been deliberately concealed from media exposure, despite countless efforts to bring attention to my case from the very onset of this terrible ordeal in 2010. In fact, I was arrested and had my bail revoked for attempting to seek exposure and help from U.S. media on my website, American Down Under, in 2011, and then threatened still by Gary Thwaites with further charges if I did not shut down my website. I refused, and I was punished. It's all on record with the Perth Consulate Office and elsewhere. I and my family need help to clear this up and bring an end to this terrible suffering. Western Australia, you did this to a good, innocent American father who not only resided and worked among you, praised you, promoted you, and called you friend, but also trusted you. And you need to fix it, hopefully before November 18th of this year. Regardless of what they do to me on that date, I will never allow my daughter to go through her only life believing that the father she loved and respected is a criminal, whether or not we ever see each other again. Senator Hanson, I don't always agree with your politics, but if you're serious about exposing and ending false allegations in sexual assault and domestic violence cases, you have this American father behind you. I may not be a citizen of Australia, or even a resident now, but Australia is my daughter's country, where my generations from her will live and work and hope and dream and struggle, succeed, and carry on. I swore on my application for permanent residency in 1999 that I would always fight and protect Australia from tyranny and threat, both foreign and domestic, as I would for my own country. And I mean it still today. And thank you from me and countless fathers for having such courage to bring this serious matter into the open. Sky News, You're the only news source worth watching and paying attention to in Australia now. I watch and follow you all the time from America, trying to stay abreast of important issues affecting my daughter's country, as well as events that affect the relationship between our two nations in these delicate, troubled times. Mine is a hell of a story, from my first arrival in Australia in 1999 to present. It was a love story like no other. Americans need to know what has been occurring in Australia this past decade in order to understand what is now happening in America. Equally important, I and my family here in America would be forever in appreciation if you would consider giving my case at least the time of day through media exposure in order to hopefully find someone willing to help clear my name for my daughter, for my family, because what they are still doing to us today as a direct result of what WA did to me in 2010 is slowly killing us. I'm forced to wear an ankle bracelet, which has caused tremendous damage to my leg and nerves. I'm fully capable but now unable to properly care for my aging parents and other family members, which, as the eldest and my mother's only son, is my responsibility. We didn't deserve this. Now, lastly, I will end this video with a plea that I have written on the end of every letter and recorded on every relevant video since this nightmare began in 2010. If you know my daughter Amy, tell her I love her and that I never left her. Her daddy was taken. I'm still searching for you, Amy. Find me. My name is John Victor Ramses. Thank you if you've taken the time to watch this video.